Hello and welcome to my video all about how to make a reversible cable pattern. This is particularly useful for projects where you're going to see both sides of the knitting, such as in scarves. I'm going to be showing you how to knit two simple cables that are both reversible. The first one I've already done a couple of repeats of here. On both sides you'll see that the knitting is made up of single or 1x1 rib stitch, which you can recognise by the vertical ridges and valleys, and also the fact it's quite stretchy. The cable itself is made from double or 2x2 rib stitch, and what I like most about this stitch is that it looks very similar to a stockinette cable, and yet it's reversible. The pattern for this cable, which I'm going to show you first, has single ribbing for the outer 4 stitches and double ribbing for the central 8 stitches. And then on the back you can see it's exactly the same. You will find that reversible cables nearly always use the rib stitch, either for the cable or for the knitting that's surrounding the cable. However, several other reversible stitches are available to use, such as seed stitch. It's a particularly simple cable because all of the rows have exactly the same pattern except for the cable row. First you do 4 stitches of single ribbing, so that's knit 1, then purl 1, then take the yarn to the back for another knit stitch, and then back to the front for a purl stitch. You've now completed 4 stitches of single ribbing. And now we're going to do 8 stitches of double ribbing, which begins with 2 knit stitches. Then we do 2 purl stitches. Remember, the yarn is always at the front for purls and at the back for knits. Then we do 2 knit stitches, and then 2 purl stitches. So that's 2 repeats of the double rib stitch completed. And then we do 4 stitches of single ribbing to finish. So that's 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch, 1 knit stitch, and 1 purl stitch. And that row represents the pattern that you're going to repeat for almost all the rows in this cable. And so for row 2 we just do that pattern again. So that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, then knit 2, purl 2, knit 2, purl 2, and finally knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, and purl 1. And then we're on to row number 3, which is the cable row. You're going to need a cable needle to complete it. First, as always, you do 4 stitches of single ribbing, so that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, then take the working yarn to the back and use your cable needle to slip 4 stitches purlwise from the left hand needle. If you're using a hooked cable needle, then use the short side to slip the stitches. Then I leave the cable needle at the front of my knitting because I want to do a front cross or left leaning cable. If you wanted to do a right leaning or back cross cable, you would just leave the cable needle at the back of your work instead. And then you do 1 repeat of the double rib stitch, so that's 2 knit stitches, then 2 purl stitches, and then you do exactly the same but with the stitches on the cable needle. So you slide the stitches to the right hand side or the end of the long side if you're using a hooked cable needle, and then making sure that the working yarn is at the back, you do 2 knit stitches and then 2 purl stitches before leaving your cable needle to one side. And then, as usual, you finish with 4 stitches of single ribbing. So that's 1 knit stitch, 1 purl stitch, 1 knit stitch, and 1 purl stitch. I then knit 3 rows with exactly the same pattern as I used for row 1 and row 2. So I'm just going to put that pattern up on screen now so you can knit along. If you want your cable to have a looser look with the twists further apart, then you can repeat the pattern for more than 3 rows if you want. That's the great thing about cables really, it's so easy to add variations and change the pattern. And then to carry on, you just keep knitting that 6-row pattern repeat. As you can see in the bottom half of this knitting sample, I've knit a couple more repeats in a lighter weight yarn, just so you can see the difference in the look. In the top half, what I've knit is a cable of the same width, but I've used single ribbing for the cable and seed stitch for the stitches surrounding it. And this is the other reversible cable pattern that I'm going to show you how to knit now. So for row 1, we're going to knit the same repeat over and over again. And that repeat is going to be knit 1, purl 1. So we do knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1, which you'll recognise as being the same as in the previous pattern I showed you. And then for the central 8 cable stitches, we do exactly the same. So that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1, knit 1, purl 1. And this will be making a cable out of single rib stitch, rather than double rib stitch which we used before. And then the last 4 stitches again are knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1. And then we're on to row number 2, which is where the pattern changes a little bit. This time we start with 1 purl stitch, because of course we're knitting seed stitch for the sides this time, rather than single ribbing. So that's purl 1, then knit 1, then purl 1, then knit 1. And then the next 8 stitches are single ribbing, so the working yarn stays at the back and we start with a knit stitch, then a purl stitch, then a knit, a purl, a knit, a purl, a knit and a purl. And then the last 4 stitches are carrying on the seed stitch pattern, so the working yarn stays at the front and we do a purl stitch, then a knit stitch, then a purl, and then a knit. And then we're on to row number 3, which is the cable row. We begin the same as we did on row number 1 with a knit stitch, then a purl stitch, a knit stitch, and a purl stitch. We then slip 4 stitches purlwise onto our cable needle and leave the cable needle at the front of our work. Then we do 4 stitches of single ribbing, so that's knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1, and then the same again for the 4 stitches on the cable needle. So slide the stitches to the end, then knit 1, purl 1, knit 1 and purl 1. And then we finish the row how we started the row, with a knit stitch, a purl stitch, a knit stitch and a purl stitch. And then for the next 3 rows of this 6-row pattern repeat, I just use the same patterns as I did for row 1 and row 2. So rather than demonstrate those same rows again, I'm now going to put the pattern for rows 4, 5 and 6 up on the screen now. Rows 4 and 6 are the same as row 2, and row 5 is the same as row 1. And you simply repeat those 6 rows for as long as you want. And that's how you do 2 variations of a simple reversible cable. I really hope you found this tutorial useful, and thank you very much for watching.